Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to day 5 of reading through the New Testament in 90-ish days. Today we're working on Matthew 12 and 13. So the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who are the religious leaders at the time, catch Jesus and his disciples gathering grain in the fields and healing a man with a messed up hand on the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath is the day of rest in the Hebrew law. You were not allowed to work that day. And so they caught Jesus working in two different ways. Jesus replies by citing precedents where both David, his ancestor, and the Levites in the Old Testament labor on the Sabbath, and it's not considered breaking of the law. He also says, if your sheep falls in the well on a Sabbath day, are you really not going to get that sheep out? You're just going to let it die so that you don't labor? He then goes on to quote the prophet Hosea when he says, God desires mercy, not sacrifice. Meaning, God is looking for a relationship with you. He's looking for a relationship with me. He cares much less about ritual, performing ritual rites, and he cares much more about having a relationship with us. Jesus goes on to cite the prophet Isaiah, saying that he's the one that will claim justice to the Gentiles, and in his name, the Gentiles will have hope, which is great for you and me because this is foreshadowing that salvation was originally offered to the Jews. The Jews rejected Jesus, and so then Jesus opened us up salvation to all the Gentiles being anybody who's not Jewish. Probably the majority of us watching this video. So it's beautiful that God's plan was always in existence, that salvation would eventually come to all of us, the Gentiles, not just God's chosen people. Jesus goes around casting out demons, and the Pharisees and Sadducees say, he's not casting out demons in God's name, he's casting out demons in Satan's name. And Jesus goes, a house divided against itself cannot stand. If Satan is casting out demons in the name of Satan, what's the point? His kingdom is going to collapse. Obviously, he's casting out demons in the name of God, his Father. He goes on to say that he will give the sign of Jonah. Now, the sign of Jonah is very interesting because Jonah was a prophet that was swallowed by the whale or a big fish, depending on the translation you're reading, and he stayed in the belly of the fish for 3 days. Jesus is saying he is about to stay in the belly of the earth for 3 days because he's going to die, be buried in the tomb, and be resurrected in heaven on the 3rd day, the day we know is Easter. So he's saying the sign that he's giving that he is the Son of God is the sign of Jonah. He also talks about casting out unclean spirits. If you cast out the unclean spirit, the spirit will wander around, and if it can find no place else to go, eventually it's going to come back to you and find a nice, tidy, empty human to inhabit, and it's going to bring a bunch of friends with it. So it's important, if an unclean spirit is cast out of you, you need to replace that spirit with Jesus. If you don't have Jesus in you, then the unclean spirit may come back and bring its friends, and then you're in more trouble than you were in the first place. Jesus returns to his hometown of Nazareth and begins preaching. He's got a crowd around him, and his mother and brothers come to try to see him, and he refuses to see them. He looks around at the crowd and he says, anybody who does the will of my Father in heaven, those are my mother and brothers. So he then begins to speak in parables. The first parable he tells is the parable of the sower, saying a man that was planting seeds scattered some seeds on the path, and birds would come and take the seed and eat it. He would scatter the seeds in rocky ground, and the seeds would grow a little bit, but the seeds were unable to grow roots deep into the ground. So when the sun came out the next day, the seeds would just wither up and die because it didn't have deep roots. It would sow the seeds in the brambles, and the brambles and the weeds would come and crush the life out of the seed. But it was not until the sower planted the seeds in fertile soil that the plant would grow and produce fruit. So what is Jesus saying? He's saying the first seed that's scattered on the path, if you don't understand the gospel the first time you hear it, Satan's going to come and take that seed and take it away to make sure that you don't understand the gospel. The seeds that are scattered in rocky soil, sure, if you can have a little bit of faith, a little bit of growth the first time you hear the gospel, but if you're not able to grow deep roots into the gospel the first time that hard times come around, you're going to give up your faith and you're going to feel like it wasn't for you and you're going to wither and blow away. The seeds that are planted in brambles, that represents the busyness of life. If you take the gospel and you receive it, but you working 12 hours a day, you got family matters to attend to, you got all kinds of things that are taking precedence over the gospel, then those things are going to grow in and crowd around and kill the gospel growing in your life. But if you're the type that receives the seed, receives the gospel into fertile soil, you will grow and produce good fruits, which, as we know the people that are truly saved by the fruits that they produce. He tells the parable of the weeds and the parable of the net. He says, man is planting weed in the field, but weeds come and grow around it. And his workers say, do you want us to come and pull all these weeds? He goes, no. You might accidentally pull up some of the wheat when you're pulling out the weeds. Just let them grow together. And then when it's time for a harvest, we can pull everything and then separate the wheat from the weeds and then burn the weeds, and we'll take the good wheat into the storehouse. He also tells the parable of the nets where they pull the net out of the water and separate the good fish from the bad fish. What does that mean? That means that the bad weeds and the good Christians producing good fruit, they're going to grow together on earth until the end of the age. And at the end of the age, when God comes to separate from the wheat from the chaff, it'll be too late. The weeds are going to get burned away, and the Christians that produce fruit are going to get ushered up into heaven. So you won't know until it's too late, until the end times have come, if you're a weed or something producing good fruit. He talks about having the faith of a mustard seed. The tiniest mustard seed is the tiniest little seed, and if you plant it, it grows into one of the biggest plants. And he said, as long as you have the faith of a mustard seed, that faith can develop into a huge plant. He also talks about the parable of the leaven. When you take a little bit of leaven and mix it into flour, all of the flour becomes leavened, even with just a little bit of leaven. So if your life and you put a little bit of gospel into it and you mix that gospel all around, the entire life gets saturated with gospel. Same thing with sin. If you've got a life and you put a little bit of sin in that life, that sin can get mixed around and suddenly your life is full of sin instead of being full of the gospel. Matthew talks about how the fact that Jesus does teach in parables fulfills a prophecy found in the Psalms. And Jesus finally tells the parable of the pearl and the hidden treasure. Both parables are kind of the same. A man finds hidden treasure in a place. A man finds a expensive pearl in a place. He goes back and he sells all his goods and comes back and buys the land so he can be the owner of the treasure and the pearl. Saying, the gospel's a treasure. The gospel's a pearl. It's time to cast off things that are worthless and dedicate your life to the gospel. That's what those mean. And finally, Jesus is in his hometown, and he closes with Matthew 13:57, which reads, "A prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and in his own household." The reason he says this is he's sitting there trying to teach in his hometown, and people that grew up around him are saying, this isn't the coming Messiah. This isn't the Son of God. We saw him. We saw him growing up with his brothers and sisters. There's no way this guy is the coming Messiah. And then Jesus said, I go around and I perform miracles. I even perform miracles right here. And you still don't believe me? I can go out and get honor in other places because they believe I'm the coming Messiah. But here in my hometown, nobody believes it. What do you say? Would you believe Jesus if he came around and healed the sick, brought the dead back to life? Would you believe? Tomorrow we read Matthew 14-17, so do your homework. Check back in here and we will summarize another day. God bless.